all of the #1 dad mugs in the world change to show the actual ranking of dads suddenly. First story by Ghost Write the Whip. Most families that live in the Summit Meadows neighborhood chose the suburban paradise for its fair weather and peaceful ambience. It's currently ranked the 4th most ideal place in America to raise a family, as chosen by Consumer Report magazine, which states, and I quote, "The suburban quiet is broken only by the sound of bicycles, birds, and the occasional lawnmower." But on July 18th, exactly 1 month after the Great Unmugging, the cul-de-sac in Summit Meadows was alive and buzzing. The children of 1134, 1136, and 1148 Meadow Drive, 7 heads in all, gathered together at the grass island enclosed by the pavement circle, each child trying their best to shout over their peers. Jacob was the oldest, the tallest, and also the loudest, which made him the ringleader by default. Eventually, the arguing subsided, order was established, and then he was able to hold court. "Me and Sophia snuck into the Baker house last night," he announced. "We saw the mug. Tom's dad is at #3 now." "Prove it," Jennifer said, a small freckled girl with a shock of red hair tumbling out of a ponytail. "Where's the mug? You did take it, didn't you?" "I was gonna, but Sophia got scared. Thought we would get in trouble." "I wasn't afraid of getting in trouble," said Sophia. "I was just saying we wasn't no thieves, that's all." A shiny silver SUV turned onto the street and drove towards the group of children, standing at the dead end. The group turned to study the car, waiting for it to come into view. "That's Tom and his dad now," Jacob said as it neared. "Everyone shut up and act normal. Anyone rats on me and you're dead." The SUV pulled into the driveway of 1132 Meadow Drive, and the engine died. There was a slam of doors, and Tom and his father emerged from the car. "Hey, you kids," Tom's dad said, loosening his tie. "What are you rascals up to today? Hopefully not getting into any trouble this time. Mrs. Dubinsky still hasn't left me off the hook for letting you lot dig up her flower bed." No, sir. Of course not," Jacob said. "We was just thinking of trying to get a game of street hockey organized." Tom's father smiled. "Sounds like fun. Tom and I have to have a talk first, but then he should be able to join you." He winked. "You can pick him last if you want. He won't mind." Tom was already heading into the house, doing his best to avoid eye contact with both his father and the rest of the group. The group of children waited dutifully until the front door slammed behind the father-son duo before speaking. Jennifer craned her neck, checking that they were gone, then took the risk. "He hasn't been around for weeks. Now all of a sudden he's #3, she breathed. "If that's true, then that means—" "He jumped up almost 10 slots, Jacob said, finishing everyone's thoughts. "What does it even mean to be the #1 dad?" Sophia asked. "Everyone just says it's that the coolest, nicest, richest dad is #1. But ain't nobody knows what they judging them on. It could be anything, really." "Whatever it measures, Tom's dad is gonna be #1 in it soon," Jacob said. Just then there was a shout from inside 1132 Meadow Drive, and the door sprang open. "I hate you!" Tom screamed, wiping tears from his eyes. He bolted across the lawn and down the street, disappearing into the shimmering haze of the July heat. Tom's father flew out the door after him. "Tom, come back! Will you just let me explain?" He trailed off, aware that the eyes of the entire neighborhood were still on him. "Sorry you had to see that, guys," he said. "Ice cream on me later if you promise not to tell Mrs. Baker about this." "Sure," Jacob said, hesitating. Then, "Is Tom okay?" "Yeah, he's just a little upset with his old man. You can't blame the little guy. We all have to make tough decisions. This big jerk of a father," he pointed both thumbs at himself, "just announced he has to leave on another business trip. Had an urgent conference come up in Miami. I get his point that I'm never home, but hey, sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the greater good. He began to stride down the road after his son. As he did so, something fell out of his pocket. A piece of paper, fluttering in the wind down towards the group of children. Jacob ran over and snagged it out of the breeze. "Sir, you dropped your—" He trailed off, realizing Mr. Baker could no longer hear him. Jacob looked down at the paper, still warm from a printer. There was a black and white photograph of a man he did not recognize, wearing a dark suit and black glasses. The photograph was captioned, "Name, Gary Temples. Rank, 2. Location, 17 Cherry Lane, Miami, Florida." Second story by J. Ray Wang. The kids bullied my daughter because of me. This I already knew. I was the reason Angie came home with timid steps and snuck off to her room without saying hi. I made a fist as the soft patter of her footsteps disappeared down the hall. Kids were cruel, and life even crueler. Angie had done nothing to deserve a father like me. I had been born completely blind, and with my balding head, my pendulum cane, and sunglasses worn even at night, I made for quite the spectacle. One that Angie paid for every day in her middle school classroom. "What's wrong with your dad?" they would ask her. "Why does he walk so funny?" "There's nothing wrong with him," she would snap back, and in her frustration, they found weakness. "My dad doesn't need a cane to walk. My dad doesn't wear sunglasses at night. My dad isn't blind." My phone buzzed in rapid succession 3 times. It was time for work. I pushed myself out of my seat and grabbed my cane. I paused as I passed Angie's room. "Hey, honey," I tried. "I'm going off to work now. Everything okay at school today?" No response. I couldn't even hear the sound of her breaths. She didn't want to talk. I offered a smile, which she wouldn't be able to see, but I hoped it sounded through my words. "I love you, Ange. I'll see you in the morning. Sleep tight." And then, I left. A dad who not only got his daughter bullied in school, but ran off to work when his daughter needed him the most. But who else would pay the bills? And was that really a good enough excuse to abandon my little girl? Tears welled up in my useless eyes as I started my cane in its rhythmic pendulum swing. I worked security at a small law firm. People would think that being at the front desk would require some sort of sight. But I recognized every voice that came into the building, and I could hear people's lies through the tremble of their breaths. The other lawyers joked that I was like a drug dog for lies. "Hey," Aaron said, his footsteps approaching. "You get one of these yet?" I glanced up at his voice. "Let me see." He let out a small chuckle and held it towards me. I grabbed it and realized that it was a mug. I felt around its smooth edges and frowned. "A mug? I already have one," I said. "No, that's a World's Greatest Dad mug. It shows your ranking in terms of being a good dad." I felt the edge again. Still nothing. "Hey, congrats on being the world's greatest dad." "What?" Aaron's voice inflected up. He was on the verge of laughing again. "Me? The best? Yeah, right. I was lucky to be in the top 50%, which isn't that hard considering that some dads are in jail." I gave Aaron a smile. "Congrats on above average, then." "Thanks. Let me see if I can get you one. You got yourself a little girl, don't you?" I nodded. "Thanks," I said. But Aaron wasn't the giving type. He was the competitive type, and I knew all he wanted was to see someone ranked lower than himself. So, let's compare the blind dad to every other dad in the world. I'd be lucky to hit average. The mug was coming in the mail. An extended holiday weekend meant I had 5 days before it got here. And in that time, I had to hit number 1. If people were making fun of Angie because of her dad, then I just have to prove that her dad was the best. My phone buzzed again, this time twice. It was time to go home. In 3 hours, Angie would wake up for school, and I had to be ready by then.
Dad? You're still awake?
Angie yawned and asked. Yeah, got home early from work, so I slept earlier, I said, which of course was a lie. I hadn't slept at all. Take a seat. Breakfast is almost ready. I listened for the sizzle and pop of the bacon. It was getting close.
What is this? Are we celebrating something?
I always woke up for breakfast with Angie, but that was usually a time for toast and conversation. Now I had diced fruit, fluffy pancakes, and an assortment of toast and jelly options splayed out on the table. Nothing in particular, I told her. Hey, after school, why don't we go to that new amusement park that opened up? You've been wanting to go, haven't you?
Yeah,
Angie said, caution in her voice.
but last I checked, we're still poor.
I shrugged. I found the money. I'll pick you up after school, and we can walk to a bus stop together.
Okay, Dad.
Though she was still wary, no 9-year-old girl would pass up a day at the amusement park. I nodded. It's a date. And I could feel her rolling her eyes. She was right, though. We were still poor. But all that meant was I had to start working mornings as well as nights. I could find an hour or two in between to sleep, and the rest of the time would be either on the clock or with Angie. There were zoos to see, aquariums to wander, clothes to buy, and through it all, I had to make sure that Angie was having the time of her life. I took a small breath and turned off the stove. Bacon's ready. Dig in. Angie held the mug in her lap. It was wrapped in cheap paper. Her dad sat on the couch, watching her, listening for her breaths. The past 5 days had been strange, to say the least. Every day was a new adventure. The first day was at an amusement park, where her dad had even let her buy dipping dots. She had bought an extra large serving. The second day was at the zoo, where her dad had bought whatever animal feed she had asked for. So she had fed half the animals in the petting zoo. On the third day, he had offered for her to swim with dolphins. She wanted to, but told him no. Money didn't grow from trees, and even if it did, she was too short and him too blind to reach it. That day he had fallen asleep on the bus, mid-conversation. And in his sleep, his breaths had become labored, and his smile dropped. It took so much tugging to wake him up that they almost missed their stop. She had been having the time of her life, but it didn't seem the same with her dad. And though he sled and exclaimed and laughed, she could hear it in the wilt of his words, and the small, strained breaths he took when he didn't think she was in earshot. After all, she was almost as good a lie detector as he, and he was beyond tired. "What's it say?" he asked her. "Is it a good number?" Angie swallowed and unwrapped the mug. She had a suspicion what this was about. Her dad always blamed himself for the bullying. He had always thought if only he weren't blind, everything would be okay, and sometimes even Angie believed that. But it wasn't true. Her dad wasn't the reason kids were mean. The ceramic felt cool to touch. She looked at the words. Her eyes widened, and a swell of air caught in her throat. "Dad," she nearly whispered, "you made number 1!" Her father let loose a single, exhausted breath. "Oh, good," he muttered. "Now the other kids won't be able to make fun of you anymore." His words waned, and his eyes closed as he drifted off to sleep. Angie held the mug in her hand, rubbing her thumb along its surface. It was completely smooth. She ran off and found a permanent marker and crossed out the 10,233. In its place, she wrote 1.